Kirby, go ahead. Okay,
Our
15.
program speaker, our program speaker today is our very own Jody Borelli. She will be talking about the difficult and important topic of drug addiction. In terms of the Rotary International 7 areas of focus, this is part of disease prevention and treatment. Jody last spoke to our club about this topic in March of 2020, and I'm eager to hear her update. She's an inspirational speaker and co-occurring disorder specialist in Bellingham, where she works as part of the PACT team, Program for Assertive Community Treatment at Lake Whatcom Center. She grew up in Puyallup and raised 3 children in Bonnie Lake. Jody is a graduate of Whatcom Community College, where she earned an Associate of Science degree as a substance use disorder professional. She's currently hard at work completing her bachelor's degree at Central Washington University. She's a fierce advocate for those suffering from addiction and mental health disorders. Her message is clear, quote, "Our strength is resiliency," unquote. When not in front of an audience, Jody can be found riding her bike around Bellingham or summiting the alpine peaks of the North Cascades. Please welcome Jody as our speaker.
Thank you, Steve. Anytime you see a turtle up on top of a fence post, you know he had some help. I had come across this
Recording in
turtle
progress.
while I was in jail, but never really knew what it meant. I would later find out Alex Haley, the author of Roots, had a picture of a turtle up on top of a fence post hanging on his wall. And when asked about it, he replied, "Every time I write something significant, every time I read my words and think that they are wonderful, I look at the turtle up on top of the fence post and remember that he didn't get up there on his own. He had help." My name is Jody Borelli, and I'm a recovering heroin addict. I share my journey of opioid addiction through a narrative storytelling in an effort to convey a message of hope and resiliency, sometimes emotional, sometimes humorous. You have permission to laugh, and during the Q&A that follows, there is no question that's off limits. You can ask me anything. My addiction began after a shoulder injury and pain medication prescribed by my doctor. I went from soccer mom and PTA president to heroin addict living on the streets of Tacoma, being arrested over 20 times in 4 years, and making an appearance on Washington's Most Wanted. Addiction stole the beautiful life I once had. Prior to my addiction, I was a stay-at-home mom, and this was my identity. My children and my family were everything to me. My kids would come home from school to the smell of fresh-baked cookies. I was the neighborhood mom, too. My yard was the baseball field, the football field, and the basketball court, depending on the day. I was actively involved in every aspect of my children's lives, and my weekends often revolved around the sport of the season. My addiction began after I detached my labrum while coaching my son's Little League baseball team. I was prescribed medication to treat the pain, and my life was forever changed. The pills worked, but as I numbed the pain, I also numbed all the joy out of my life. Eventually, I couldn't tell the difference between joy and pain, and my life deteriorated rapidly. I didn't recognize addiction as it overtook me. I had multiple ER visits for stomach issues, which I now know to be withdrawal. I had my gallbladder removed for the love of surgeries and pain pills that would follow. And I had faked multiple surgeries in order to obtain pain pills from the doctor with whom I had a pain contract. In 2009, I completed treatment at Residence 12 in Kirkland for a Vicodin addiction. My second attempt at treatment was at Sundown M Ranch in March of 2012, and at this point, I had progressed to OxyContin. I left treatment early, and 3 days later, I had a needle in my arm and a new love for heroin. Once my addiction had progressed to IV drug use, the shame was unbearable. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't allow my children to see me that way. They were everything to me, and I left them because of my addiction. Angelina, my baby, was 12 and still clinging to my apron strings. She was my little shadow. Joseph, 13, always my little protector, and the one I had coached for years in Little League Baseball. Jaden was 17 and old enough to understand. The devastation that followed was horrific. Existing only to use, I lost myself in the grit of trap houses, stealing to support my habit, living in constant fear, and always on the run. I was the epitome of hopelessness. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. Suffering in ways beyond comprehension. Waking up, coming to, mad as hell that I even woke up because it meant I had to endure the misery for yet another day. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. Many ask, how could this happen? No one chooses to become a drug addict, yet addiction is the disease of choice. The area of the brain responsible for decision-making is diseased. Nobody blames an Alzheimer's patient for forgetting where they put their keys, so why do we blame the addict for making poor choices? The area of the brain responsible for decision-making is diseased. Now looking back, the progression of my addiction was not gradual, and at no point was it ever manageable. From the first time the needle hit my vein, the pendulum was in the pit, methodically cutting away at every part of me. Reduced down to the bare necessities, my life was consumed by the cycle of addiction. Life consisted of stealing and using to avoid being dope sick. The hurt was unbearable, but there was relief in the needle. There was relief in the needle, but the hurt was unbearable. Now on the streets, girls typically have two options in order to survive: sell themselves or acquire items to sell, also known as boosting. Now, prior to my addiction, I was an avid Nordstrom shopper and I knew my high-end women's products. So, every drug dealer has a main girl and a bunch of side girls, and I saw an opportunity. What a better way to keep all of your girlfriends happy than with makeup, perfume, and other various high-end women's products. This was my hustle, which earned me the illustrious title of Ulta Thief on Washington's Most Wanted, capture number 805. Now, over the course of 4 years, I was booked into jail over 20 times. I was once arrested for stealing a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. I recall the arresting officer distinctly. It was the first time that an officer genuinely expressed concern for my well-being. He treated me like a human and not some strung-out junkie. I don't remember the entire conversation, but what I do remember is what he asked me. Don't you want more out of life? Through his kindness, his words imprinted onto me, and a seed was planted. He still took me to jail, and that was where I would spend my 40th birthday. Now, detoxing in jail is miserable, but what's worse is detoxing in the hole on suicide watch. But that's what happens when you climb over the rail and threaten to jump off the second tier of 5 West at Pierce County Jail. You end up in the hole, alone, on suicide watch, wearing what's referred to as the turtle suit. Eventually, I was released, but that wouldn't last long. Now, the calamity that follows is not funny, but. So two police officers walk into a Nordstrom rack, and my response was perfectly logical at the time. I did what I thought was reasonable, what any addict with stolen merchandise and a pesky warrant would do. I dove into the nearest clothing rounder. Imagine this, a grown woman hiding in a clothing rack like a child playing hide and go seek. That was not a fun ride to jail. Now the worst part was when the officer told me that they weren't even looking for me, but that hiding in a clothing rounder seemed mighty suspicious. He went on to tell me that I would have gotten away with it too if it hadn't been for the meddling toddler trying to climb in after me. So there's an ancient Eastern curse that goes something like this. May you have an interesting life. And I think about this. It's a great way to sum up my experience with jail. It is not good. It was not fun. But it was definitely interesting. Jail is not designed to rehabilitate you. It does not change you for the better. What you were on the outside, it just makes you more of. If you were gangster on the outside, you'll be more gangster on the inside. Before opioid addiction, now I was a wonderful homemaker on the outside. And on the inside, I was Martha freaking Stewart. I had no idea how my skills would transfer over into jail life. But take, for instance, ladies, if you want foundation, it's coffee grounds and moisturizer. And if you want self-tanner, it's coffee grounds and moisturizer. If you want eye concealer, it's coffee grounds and Preparation H, because it gets rid of the puffiness. You can get that on commissary, I promise. What can I say? I knew my high-end women's products, and this was my hustle inside and outside of jail. Now, being released from jail was usually contingent upon going to substance use treatment. I was court-ordered to attend treatment multiple times. And during one intake session, to say it went bad would be an understatement. I had walked into the intake session with the big blue rubber tie-off still wrapped around my arm, having just shot up in the parking lot. Shortly after that intake session, I had reached a new absolute low. I was taken to a new dealer's house to get well. A teenager of about 16 answered the door, and he looked at me for a very long time before finally saying, You're Joseph's mom, aren't you? He was a kid from my baseball team that I had coached years before. I had driven him to practice many times. He had played in my yard and he's eaten Otter Pops on my front porch. Addiction does not discriminate. It takes the young, it takes the old, and once it takes hold, escape from addiction is often elusive. I wasn't surprised that I ended up on Washington's Most Wanted. What surprised me most was that the camera really does add 10 pounds, and that horizontal stripes are not your friend on TV. Now, living on the streets during this time was horrific. The constant fear and anxiety was exhausting. Word had spread fast after my television debut, and I was hearing the buzz. It was like I was being circled by sharks. Not only did I have the cops looking for me because of that pesky warrant, but I also had dealers, addicts, and other so-called friends trying to kidnap me to collect the reward from Crime Stoppers. I was becoming increasingly paranoid and afraid for my safety. Eventually, I was arrested. On day 7 of detoxing, I awoke to 4 police officers standing over me. I was hurt, angry, and lost. The epitome of hopelessness. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die. I had overdosed many times, been in and out of jails and hospitals. I had suffered endocarditis, an infection in my heart, and I've had an infection in my left arm that should have left me an amputee. Escape no longer possible. I was desperate. I was losing my mind, my body, and my battle with addiction. Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Desperate Ground. Upon desperate ground, or as it were, sitting in a leaking boat, or lying in a burning house, you will survive if you fight quickly, and perish if you do not. On December 2nd, 2016, shortly after being released from jail, I moved to Bellingham with a duffel bag of clothes, 11 teeth in my head, and a ferocious attitude. I was in desperate need of help. I was ordered to attend intensive outpatient treatment as part of probation, and this is where my recovery begins and I start to heal. I was pulled up from depths unimaginable. Despite my rough exterior, my counselor treated me with respect and dignity. I was shown empathy despite my hostility, and given compassion in exchange for vulgarity. I was so broken. I am grateful for my counselor who provided me with the hope that I so desperately needed until I was able to find my inner light. A transformation began to occur as my recovery starts to grow roots. I found employment for the first time in years, but working at a gas station felt hopeless. Never underestimate the power of that planted seed. I remembered those words from that kind police officer years before, asking, "Don't you want more out of life?" I wanted fulfillment, but I was apprehensive about everything, and I lacked confidence. It was during a one-on-one that my counselor suggested that I would be a good fit for the substance use disorder professional program at Whatcom Community College. And shortly thereafter, I applied and was accepted as part of the first graduating cohort. I would go on to graduate summa cum laude, receive the Transforming Lives Award, President Kathy, and the Public Speaking Award. And I was featured in the Whatcom Community College Transit Ad Campaign under the caption, "Our Strength is Resiliency." Now, I'm fully licensed through the Department of Health as a substance use disorder professional and work as a co-occurring disorder specialist on the PAC team, which stands for Program for Assertive Community Treatment. My clients are schizophrenic, schizoaffective, or bipolar with psychotic features. Many are homeless or living in housing first models, and I work with them on their substance use issues. I'm currently hard at work on my bachelor's degree, and in spring of 2023, I will be graduating from Central Washington University with a bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies, social sciences, and a minor in psychology. All of the successes aside, I'm here to tell you that recovering from opioid addiction is brutal. They don't tell you about the exhausting 3 months of Hep C treatment in the recovery brochure. There are no instructions on how to cope with the loss of your stepdad to overdose, or how you'll react to finding the pills that killed him while cleaning out his car. Lab results showed the pills that killed my stepdad Mike were fake oxys laced with fentanyl. Being labeled a heroin addict was a huge barrier for me. Coupled with being on Washington's Most Wanted, it was devastating. I'm not embarrassed about my story anymore, and I do not regret the past. Now, I have the opportunity to share my story, share my experience, and provide hope to others, and hopefully inspire them to be the change that they want to see in the world. Today, my kids are all young adults. Jayden is 27, Joseph is 22, and Angelina is 21. They all call me, they tell me that they love me, and that they are proud of me. So many ask, why is the turtle on top of the fence post? My answer is this, because this is where she is happiest. Thank you.
Jody, I think I'm going to give you a pseudonym,
Huh.
and that is Hope.
Oh.
How about a standing ovation? All right, John Don's going to wrap it up today with a book report.